Welcome to all of you to today's center's lecture. It's part of the featured former fellows where we bring back some of the people we have been lucky at the center to host for a semester or a year. But before introducing today's speaker, let me remind you of the event. On Friday, there is no lunchtime talk, but we have the second lecture of the annual lecture series at 3:30 at Pitt on the 10th floor of the Cathedral of Learning. And the talk will be given by Angela Potocznik on causes don't push. On Tuesday next week, we are coming back to our regular schedule. We have a talk by Oran Shagri at noon on Tuesday. And the topic will be the mathematical objection to artificial machine intelligence. And on Friday, Amanda Evans, my colleague in HPS, will be talking about psychiatric deep brain stimulation and the ethics of mechanistic recovery. So we hope to see you at the center is on Friday on the 10th floor or at the center next week here on Tuesday and Friday at noon. So today it's my pleasure to introduce Mike Tomasello. It's my job in a way to flatter our guests, but what I will say, I really mean it. So it's actually Nobel Prize seasons, as I'm sure you know it. Yesterday we had medicine, today we had physics. There is no Nobel Prize in psychology, even so a few psychologists have won Nobel Prize in the past, including Herb Simon of Pittsburgh's fame. If there was one, I think Mike would be a very strong candidate. As I say, it's my job to flatter you, but I really do mean it. As a matter of fact, Mike's work has been cited more than 200,000 times, which I think, for a philosopher, it's just an incredible number. There's a handful of philosophers who've reached that amount of influence. He's published many books, some of which are classics in cognitive science and in understanding of both human, but also primate development. I will mention just a few. While we cooperate in 2009 with MIT, The Cultural Origins of Human Cognition, which is an incredibly influential book with Harvard, also in 2009. A Natural History of Human Morality, which I've actually read more than once, but since I do also moral psychology, it's a book I really, really enjoy. More recently, he's been really working on agency, and he's already been publishing 2 books on agency. One's The Evolution of Agency, 2002 with MIT. The second one, the most recent published book on 2024, Agency and Cognitive Development with Cambridge. And he's working on the third book of a trilogy really on agency. And today we're going to hear some of the materials drawn from this work in progress. Mike, I didn't say that, he's a former director, he's emeritus director right now of the Max Planck Institute for Evolutionary Anthropology in Leipzig, which has been one of the most important research centers for psychology, both on babies and chimpanzees over the last 40 years, something like that. It's been really a center for the field I work on, really. And also, more recently, he's been a professor of psychology, distinguished professor of psychology in the Department of Psychology and Neuroscience at Duke, where he's been continuing his work. Mike, it's really a pleasure to have you around. We're extremely happy. I'm really delighted to have you here. And the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, Edward. I have fond memories of my time at the center, although I will mention that I was there the year that the crazy guy was calling in all the bomb threats. And so I spent my semester evacuating my office at least once a day. So, okay, let me share my screen with you here. Okay. All right, is that?
It works perfectly fine.
Okay. So as Edward mentioned, I have started thinking about agency quite a bit, and I am, I guess, known for work on what the term I borrowed from the philosophers of action for shared intentionality. But Michael Bratman also uses the term shared agency. So I started thinking about shared agency, and I've always had an interest in agency in general. And so I'm kind of doing the background for how we get to shared agency in evolution. So this is what I'm trying to do in the book that I'm currently finishing up. is to bring together some of this thinking on agency and shared agency and how we get from one to the other. Sorry here. Yes. So the 2022 book, The Evolution of Agency, which I should say I started some major parts of it in the center. And the sort of, so I'm giving you background for my new stuff that from today that I will talk about. But the background is this book argues that each animal species lives in its own ecological niche and survives and thrives by acting. In some species, individuals act by making behavioral decisions, and so they may be considered agents. Each agentive species has its own unique psychology, organized for its behavioral decision-making, which determines its, what I've called the experiential niche, borrowed from von Uexküll's famous concept of Umwelt. Each animal lives in its own Umwelt. So from that starting point, I have thought a lot about how one characterizes this theoretically. And mainstream cognitive science for the last half century or more has basically been using the mind as computer model. That's the birth of cognitive science. But the mind as computer model is neither evolutionary nor agentive. And if someone wants to ask in the Q&A about Tomasello and Cosmides, I'm happy to talk about that. They're in some ways evolutionary, but not agentive. So mainstream cognitive science, therefore, cannot explain either the psychological diversity of the natural world, and evolutionary psychology a la Tomasello and Cosmides only focuses on humans, or why human psychology is the way it is. If you say, why do humans have memory? Why do they learn? Why do they perceive? Why do they have executive function? Why do they have language? All of these things, the only explanation is the evolutionary history. You have to tell the evolutionary history. And of course, that includes cultural processes as well in the larger view of evolution. And I'm tempted to say it's the only game in town. That phrase was, of course, already used by somebody for other purposes, but why human psychology is the way it is, evolutionary explanations are the only game in town. There is no other type of explanation. So the alternative is what I'm calling in my new book, this the organism as agent model. So I'm kind of trying to contrapose the mind as a computer to the whole organism, not just the mind, but as agent, and not just as computation, but as acting in the world. And computation is a means to the end of adaptive action. I recently told some of my Bayesian friends, Bayesian learning, we don't want to characterize the child as a Bayesian learner. He's a Bayesian agent who learns to support his agency. So agency is the first principle, really, of psychology from an evolutionary point of view. Now, not everything we do is agentive. We know that. And philosophers have analyzed this in some detail. And I would say that evolutionarily, what we get in predictable situations, meaning predictable from a natural selection point of view, is what are sometimes called stimulus-driven responses or reflexes. So reflexes again, stimulus-driven, I think is a nice word. But in this book, I propose, in the 2022 book, in this book, I propose that what has evolved under unpredictable situations, that is, natural selection can build the organism to respond adaptively to predictable situations, but unpredictable situations, like exactly what this prey is going to do in this moment, in this situation, where there's a tree over here and a river over here, natural selection cannot prepare the individual organism for what to do there. It can't be a reflex. So what has evolved instead is agentive organization of action, agentive decision-making. And as opposed to stimulus-driven, I would call this goal-directed. And I've used as a kind of a model, psychologists like machines as models, but rather than the digital computer, I've chosen a control system, because control systems are built to, once you set their goal, they act autonomously and make quote unquote decisions. I'm not going to, I mean, whatever is analogous to decisions, we've built them to do this. To autonomously control some control variable. So on the right here is a schematic of a basic thermostat, which is the classic control system. It has a goal, and the human sets the goal at 72 degrees, for example, and then it senses the room temperature with some kind of thermometer, and it compares the temperature to the goal temperature, and it makes a decision. It compares them, and it triggers, obviously, the thermostat. If it doesn't match the goal, it triggers either a heating or a cooling action. That has effects on the environment, which affect the room temperature, and that affects what's being sensed. So it's a kind of a circular causality. Okay, so I'm not a sort of mechanist, and I call this the organism agent model. So we have to put flesh on this. So this is, I don't mean this to be mechanistic the way a thermostat is mechanistic. I mean, this is a description of the organization, this circular causality, where you start with a goal and then you sense the environment and you act in order to make the environment match the goal. And you do that continuously and in a ecologically sensitive manner. The mind as computer model does not operate like that. It's more stimulus driven, that it has input. As brilliant as they are, large language models need you to prompt them. They need you to get them responding to what you are asking them or telling them. Now, I want to make sure that I'm clear that people, when you think about the evolution of human psychology, cognition or whatever, you say, well, that's lost in the past, so there's no way we can really study it. But it turns out that if you look at evolutionary biology, they quite often use model species. So if they're looking at the evolution of the lungs or whatever, they find some species that they believe has not changed much from some ancestral state. Now, of course, you can debate if it's a good model or not. That's a different story. But once you have a model species that you think models some previous evolutionary period in, let's just say humans, let's say we're focused on humans, which we are here. And so you can actually then do experiments on the model species. They do experiments on the lungs of whatever species to try to see how the lungs evolved in the human body. So if you look at this diagram here, I'm going to briefly tell you about this model, this historical explanation that I have been developing that starts with the earliest vertebrates, and of course humans are vertebrates. So humans' vertebrate ancestors, turns out that most biologists think that the first vertebrates were lizard-like. The first mammals were squirrel-like, and humans are mammals, of course. And the first great apes were chimpanzee-like. And then we get humans. So, and I'm not doing comparative psychology where I'm interested in the social insects and the birds and other mammals, other primates. I'm only interested in the line to humans. So this is not a scala natura. Humans are at the top. This is an actual historical sequence. The first vertebrates emerged about 350 million years ago. The first mammals 200 million years ago. The first great apes 20 million years ago. And humans, the last 6 million years or so. So this is an actual historical sequence that we are trying to reconstruct using model species. And that means there's experimental data on the behavior and the cognition of lizards. There's quite a bit. There's even more on squirrels. And if you include rats as their rodent cousins, there's a huge literature and a lot of literature on great ape cognition and psychology, which is the species that I've studied the most. So in this book, the claim is that much of human psychology, which I think is totally uncontroversial, much of human psychology is inherited from ancestral species and can be empirically investigated in model species. And I'm trying to summarize the whole book very quickly because it's background of what I want to focus on today. But this is the historical sequence, the evolutionary sequence that I came up with. So if you look at the bottom here, the basic agentive architecture is this control system architecture: a goal, action, attention, and decision. So those are primary. This is since they're the first vertebrates, if you say, this is the backbone of agentive organization. You start with goals and attention and action and decisions. And it's all driven by the kinds of decisions you need to make. So if you look at these 3 steps, the first vertebrates, we're making only go, no-go decisions. Do this or not. Pounce on this insect or not. And then if that's successful or not, then you do something else. But it's the sequential go, no-go decisions. And this determines the kind of cognitive representations they need, the kind of executive regulation they need, in this case only reactive global inhibition, like a freeze response, not actual executive monitoring and control. And the kind of learning is habituation and conditioning. When you get to the first mammals, they're intentional agents and they make either or decisions. And to make an either or decision, you have to imagine the possibilities. And then you can make a proactive executive regulation with planning. It could be this, it could be that. If I want this, I need to do this. And all of that is done with imaginative representations. And I believe that lizards and other reptiles actually do not have imaginative representations. They come with mammals. And they can engage in hypothesis-directed learning, where they say, what if this, what if that? They engage in exploratory learning. And metacognitive, I'm not going to get it, that's too complicated, but they're making reflective decisions where they're trying to decide, did I make a good decision? Do I need more information to make a good decision? So they're monitoring their decisions and deciding what more information they need. If they've made a good decision, they want to change their mind, belief revision if needed. So I'm sorry that I have to go, I'm running over that much too quickly, and I'm not giving you any of the evidence. The book provides empirical studies of behavior and cognition of all these species to try to provide evidence for this historical hypothesis about the evolutionary history leading to humans. So that's all stuff that is shared with the other creatures. And then my major research over my career has focused on the uniquely human part. And I've called that shared intentionality, again, borrowing from Bratman and Margaret Gilbert and others, John Searle. In the context of this work on agency, I want to refer to it as shared agency. And shared intentionality are the cognitive capacities required to make the shared agency work. I've proposed 2 steps: joint agency, where it's between individuals. They have a joint goal, joint attention, they make a joint decision, they engage in joint action. But within that, each of them has their own role to play in the collaboration, and each have their own perspective on the situation. It's coordinated via communication. My proposal is it's not yet language at this early stage in humans. It's regulated via a joint commitment, which is the first normative. I'm going to come to normativity later. I don't know if Bob Brandom is on this webinar, but I learned a lot from him when I was there, and he won't like a naturalistic explanation of normativity very much, but I'm not giving a naturalistic explanation of normativity. I'm giving a naturalistic explanation of normative psychology. Okay, and then collective intentionality is more group-based. So social norms, conventions, norms, institutions, all of that is where we play our roles within some larger group collective. Okay, so again, I apologize for having to go over that very quickly, but that's what I have done in the previous work, is try to propose a specific evolutionary history leading to humans based in the idea that what organizes psychology and so experience, and I'm making that connection, which I take for granted, but I know philosophers mostly don't take anything for granted, so fine. But the psychology that empowers the individual to make the decision, to gather the information needed for a good decision, to executively regulate it, to learn, to act on the world and then learn from that action. All of that is geared toward making adaptive decisions. Right? So that's the idea of that is the background for what I want to do today. And so the book that I'm working on now, the title is the same as the title of this talk, Agency and the Organization of Human Experience, is I want to look at what is required for in certain domains of activities, some of which are shared with other species and some of which are unique to humans, and try to see where this psychology comes from. The first chapter of this book, the working title, is Why This Psychology? Why do humans have the psychology they do? And as I say, evolutionary explanation is the only game in town. So let me start with goals, because I talked about stimulus-driven versus goal-directed. So goals, having goal-directed action, having control system organization that revolves around goals is nature's way of making sure that individuals do certain things, but still have flexibility to adapt to particular immediate circumstances. So Mother Nature wants you to eat. So Mother Nature builds in hunger and goals for getting food and eating food. Mother Nature wants you to have sex. So Mother Nature builds in a sexual motivation and strategies for engaging in sexual activity to spread the genes and so forth. So what I would say, rather than goals, the way I've thought about it is that each creature has a whole panoply of what I'm calling valued situations. So valued situations are, for example, for a chimpanzee, that I have fruit. I've gathered some fruit. I have fruit in my hand. I have nuts in my hand. I have a mate in hand. I sleep in a tree. I avoid predators. So at any given moment, these valued situations are part of the chimp psychology. They are not occurrent psychological events yet. They are just propensities, capacities, dispositions, whatever you want. They are part of the psychology of the chimp that has evolved. However, I do want to point out that these valued situations I borrowed from Donald Davidson. Davidson says that what one wants is that one has the apple in hand. So the goal representation actually represents a situation. We sometimes say that the chimpanzee's goal is food. No, the chimpanzee's goal is having food or eating food. Right? So I actually think that situations, the attention to situations, is a precursor of the sort of propositional structure that we study so much in humans. And I do believe that the key here is attention. And again, I don't know if Wayne is on the webinar, but he argues that the selection problem in attention is related to action. And indeed, I agree with that 100%. Goal-directed action is what kind of solves what do you pay attention to. You pay attention to opportunities and obstacles for goal satisfaction. So a chimp might see this scene that you see in the picture, and they could attend to the situation that this fruit is in a place in the tree that I'm capable of climbing to. So the fruit is accessible. The fruit is ripe and ready to eat, but there's a competitor in the tree. And they can attend to all of those situations in one retinal image. It may be sequentially, but they can attend to each of them because each of them is important for their choice. The selection problem in the case of agency is I only do one thing. I have to decide what to do. Do I climb the tree or not? How do I climb the tree, and so forth? Okay, so organisms have valued situations when it's time to, when they meet a situation that is relevant for them, they attend to the relevant parts of the situation, opportunities or obstacles for goal satisfaction. They attend to goal relevant situations. And so agency is a solution to what is called in the cognitive science literature sometimes the frame problem, that there are a lot of ways of framing a situation. What aspects do you focus on, et cetera. And the frame problem in AI and cognitive science is related to the fact that it doesn't have goals. The model doesn't have goals that tell it what's relevant and not relevant. So I think Wayne Wu is the best on this, and I don't need to recommend that to you all, but I'm basically taking his kind of tack on things. So the point, and each time when I'm talking to you here about are basically chapters in the book, and I'm summarizing them in one slide each, or in one case, 2 slides. But I want to make the point. So even if you don't get the full logic of the argument, you at least get the take-home point, and hopefully some of the logic of the argument. And if you and we can answer it further in the Q&A, of course. So the point is the need for agentive decision-making and action, and by agentive decision-making, I mean goal-directed, but the need for agentive decision-making and action leads to the organism operating with valued situations, which in particular circumstances become occurrent, and they become occurrent, they generate a goal for the current, a behavioral goal for this situation, which takes advantage of an opportunity or obstacle in the environment. And that attention to relevant to valued situations determines what is attended to as relevant. It's relevant to my goal-directed action. It's relevant to my values that I have as an agentive organism. So this is one example of how I think the organism as agent model solves problems that the mind as computer model has always struggled with, the problem of relevance, the frame problem. And I also think that the notion of situations as the structure of what is attended to, which I borrowed from Davidson, is he uses it for goals, but I think it fits for attention as well. Also answers a question about the origins, the deep origins of the kind of propositional structure that we think of as constituting much of higher animals' cognition. Now, this one is a little, the origin of causal logical thinking and decision-making. Okay, one chapter. I know this is a lifetime's work, but I just want to make some suggestions. So I start with the analysis of Jose Bermudez, who analyzes logical inferences he sort of decomposes them into thinking about causality. So for him, A causes B is an implication. It implies that when event A happens, that it implies that event B will happen. It causes it. So he sort of draws an analogy between causes and logical implication. It's not the same thing. I don't know my language enough, so I'm sorry if this is a mistake, but it's more of a material implication. Maybe I'm using that term wrong. But it's not obviously a kind of the kind of implication that we have in language. But again, it's a foundation that comes in evolution. And negation, which we all know the horrendous complexities of negation, he wants to say the simplest form that he's thinking about is contraries. So he uses an example of something like, if I know that a tiger causes an antelope to flee, so event A is the tiger's presence, and event B is the antelope fleeing. So if I look down at a watering hole and I see a tiger, I know that the tiger is present, and that causes the antelope to be absent. Right. So again, we're working with contraries here. And if I see that there is an antelope drinking, then I figure that there is no tiger present, or at least not one that he perceives. And so he talks about how modus ponens is like A causes B, so A happens and that leads to B. Modus tollens, he calls them proto. Modus tollens is when B is absent or not happening, or there's some negative thing in B, then we can infer A, and so forth. And so what I've done in this book is tried to say, really, and this is an idea that has been proposed in various places by various people, but not really elaborated, is that the basis of the understanding of causality is agentive action. I perceive myself as causing something to happen. And there are studies with rats where if they press a bar and cause food to happen, they learn to press that bar. But if you press the bar and the food only comes 3 seconds later, they don't learn the contingency. And Tony Dickinson argues that they understand what I call S causality, subject causality. They understand that their action causes the result, and so if the delay is too great, you don't get a learning because they don't think they caused it. Likewise, if the organism presses the bar and food comes, the rat presses the bar and food comes, but the food comes for all other times, just comes in otherwise, you don't learn the contingency either because you don't think your act caused it because it's coming all over the place. So you have to have a kind of an exclusive connection between your action and the result, and you have to have a certain temporal profile for it to work. So I'm not going to go into the details here, but this is my kind of version of what Bermudez did, but for action. So my act causes the effect, then I act and I make the inference that the effect is going to happen. If X causes Y and I don't observe the effect, then I make the inference that the act must not have taken place, assuming that act X is always effective. The sort of the fallacy of denying the antecedent, if act X causes effect Y and then there is no effect, I assume that the act didn't happen. But of course, that is not. Sorry, I went out of order here. That's the bottom one. So in any case, you get the idea that these actions and their effects and the negation is the contrary. It's not I'm saying effect zero. I'm not saying a negative effect. And if you go down to the bottom, you can have the disjunction comes from either or decision making. This either X can cause Y or Z can cause Y, and they make if X doesn't cause it, then Y must cause it, or sorry, Z must cause it. So again, very sorry to go over this very quickly, and I shudder to think what a logician would think of that. But nevertheless, I have consulted some of my colleagues in the philosophy department here and asked, are there hypotheses about the psychological origins of this kind of logical thinking? And I've been told not really. And I know there's railing against psychologism. I'm not talking about reducing logic to psychology. I'm talking about trying to understand the origins of basic inferencing, logical inferencing. And sorry, what is that? Oh, I got out of here. I won't again go into it, but great apes externalize their own causality to the external world. So just as they cause things to happen, they make the inference that there can be external causes. In my review of the literature, I don't believe other creatures other than great apes on the line to humans really understand causality, external causality. Maybe some birds, but I'm not concerned with them. So the causal logic of agentive decision-making, I'm calling it the causal logic, and action is the origin of causal logical thinking about the world. And again, I will note this timing in the behavioral contingency, that if it happens after 3 seconds, the organism doesn't think he caused it. That is exactly the same 3 seconds that Michaud found when Michaud looked at humans making decisions about did A cause B in these things happening on the screen. If A hits B and B doesn't take off for 3 more seconds, they don't perceive causality. So the temporal contour of me causing something to happen and my inferences about something else causing something to happen, that 3+ seconds is common to agentive causality and to external causality. So I think that's at least suggestive that the agentive causality, which is more widespread than the understanding of external causality, might be a source for making those kinds of inferences. And second is that a lot of research on infants' understanding of causality, their first notions of external causality are about objects smashing into one another, entraining one another, the collision event that Michaud studied and so forth. And a developmental psychologist named White has pointed out that these are infants' first actions themselves. They smash things, they pull things, whatever. And those seem to be the sort of most basic forms of external causality that we understand are the things that come most readily to young infants in their actions on the world. Okay, so I would be very interested to hear if there are people who have hypotheses about the psychological origins. I'm not talking about the cultural, historical origins of logical systems, of the psychological origins of basic logical inferencing, and where that might come from. A similar, sorry, somebody put something in the chat and it always, okay, sorry, okay. Sorry, I got distracted by the chat. So attributing causality to the external world, I'm saying, is based on one's own the experience of agentive action causing results in the world. And I believe that the attribution of agency and intentionality to others, what has been, I would say, misleadingly called a theory of mind, but attributing agency and intentionality to others is based also on an externalization of your an experience of your own agency. And it has to be executive experience of your own agency, because you're agentive, and even lizards are agentive, but we have executive and metacognitive, we observe our own agentive actions. And so therefore we can sort of see them from an executive level, and that allows us to, with some other things, to attribute them to other creatures. So this is just our classic study where we see that this is a subordinate chimp who you can't see, is like in your perspective, and a dominant chimp who you can see their leg. And there's a banana out in the open. You can see it on the left. There's also a banana behind that other bucket over there. And the question is, does the subordinate, who's on our side here, know that the dominant can see that other piece? And so, sorry, I made a mistake. The dominant is our perspective. On the other side is the guy we're interested in, the subordinate. I'm sorry, I apologize. So the subordinate, the one under the door over there, wants to know if the dominant can see the piece of food that's on her side of the bucket. And you will see that she has a choice between out in the open and the one on her side, and she cautiously takes the one on her side because she knows the dominant is going to the one that he can see. Okay, and he goes over to make sure the other one's not there. And so what I believe that this understanding, this is why I say I don't really like the term theory of mind. What you're understanding is I would say, a mentalistic understanding of the other's actions. So the other's actions are generated by goals and goals and intentions, if you will, and by their perception of the world. So the practical syllogism, I would say, is exactly what the subordinate is doing, that if the dominant wants the banana, he'll go for it. And if he wants it and sees it, he'll go for it. If he doesn't want it, if it's a rock instead of a banana, he won't go for it. And if he doesn't see it, which is what this experiment demonstrated, he won't go for it. So the sort of practical syllogism of what again is called belief desire psychology, but I would call it a goal perception psychology, where if he sees it and he wants it, he'll go for it, is a set of inferences that comes out of this kind of understanding. And we have an experiment that I think shows that they are using their own experience. So I have to do this a little schematically and briefly, but the subject, the chimp over there, is our subject. And the subject experiences these covers, the things leaning up, the green one and the one on the other side, as transparent. As one of them is transparent and one of them is opaque. So the green one is opaque and the other one is transparent. And so the chimp looks through them and sees food down below. And so they've experienced that you can see through one cover and not see through the other. Then Now we're switching perspectives. Now the camera is behind the chimp. So we've gone behind the chimp now. And a human comes in, and those covers are now down. It's the same apparatus. The chimp watched those covers push down. And now the chimp, from her perspective, cannot see through either of them because of the angle. And we fixed everything so the chimp couldn't climb up higher or anything. So from the chimp's angle, they both look opaque because the transparent one is actually a screen. And from that angle, it looks opaque. So the chimp knows you can see through one, but not the other. But at the moment, they look both the same. And now he's competing with the human. And just like that last experiment, the chimp should go for the one that she thinks the human cannot see. So should go for the one in the opaque container, and indeed that's what they go for. Even though both of the covers look the same from the chimp's perspective. Now she knows that you can see through one and not the other, and she uses that to act strategically. There's also and then they externalize that intentionality, that understanding of intentionality, in a way that others don't, and other species don't, on the line to humans. And like I didn't want to go into the details because I don't have time. In the case of causality, I think tool use is a key, tool making is a key transition. And in this case, I think imitation, when you're imitating someone, you have to try to see what they're trying to do. So you have to try to infer their goal and their intentions and so forth. Human infants also at around 1 year of age, there's evidence of exactly this, a study by Brooks and Meltzoff, where they have a blindfold that's either you can see through or not, and they can tell that the red blindfold you can see through and the blue one you can't. And then when the human puts on the red blindfold, they know she can see, and when she puts on the blue, they know she can't, even though from the kid's external perspective, they look the same at the time of testing. So human infants also can do this same attribution of experience to another individual. And I would argue based on their own experience. What else? In these experiments, the initial segment is they have a certain particular experience about these particular covers, and they attribute that to the human when she's in that situation. So the point here is that the subject uses executive experience of its own agentive experience to understand others as agentive and intentional. So again, agency is not only the basis of these logical, causal logical inferences, but also the basis of these agentive intentional inferences about what the other guy is going to do. The chimp in this study is predicting what the human over there is going to do based on whether she can see it or not. So all of this, operating with goals and attention as structured in terms of situations, causal logical thinking in its basic primitive form. I'm not talking about the human form. I'm talking about a precursor to the human form, and the understanding of a causality and intentionality in the external world all emerged in this hypothesis, which is based on empirical studies, emerged before humans in evolution, because creatures who are model species for the ones leading to humans are doing it. And it's based on the agentive organization of the decision-making and experience of the subject. So that's the claim for all of this as kind of a basic primate psychology. Has all of this, a basic, I should say, great ape psychology, which is what all of this is based on. Yes, but we also have some things that are unique to humans. And I have a recent chapter. It's in the book I'm working on now, but part of that is based on a chapter that I was invited to contribute at a symposium in the chapter by Christopher Peacock and Paul Boghossian. It's called Normative Realism. And when I went to the conference, I realized I'm not a normative realist. So I don't know if that was a surprise to them, but okay, never mind. I went ahead and did it and wrote the chapter. But here is the hypothesis in that chapter. That human normative thinking and attitudes, now again, I'm not trying to explain the normative dimensions of the world. I'm trying to explain how chimpanzees and other creatures do not think normatively, and humans do think normatively. And so I'm explaining that psychological transition, trying to. Human normative thinking and attitudes represent psychological adaptations for aligning, coordinating, and negotiating one's actions, thoughts, and attitudes with others within shared agencies. And so that's why other creatures do not think normatively, because they do not participate in shared agencies where they are interdependent with a partner for achieving a shared goal. And this interdependence with the partner for achieving a shared goal, the interdependence generates my expectations about you and what you should do and what you think I should do in my role. And I'm going to try to explain that just a little bit more. And this applies both to joint agencies with cooperative partners, which is more basic, where I'm cooperating with you and we agree to do something together. And then I don't play my role. And you don't just say, I don't like it when you don't play your role. You say, you should do this because I'm depending on you. It's part of our joint commitment. Right? And collective agencies within cultural groups, more larger groups. And that's one of the reasons why all of this is sort of opaque to us. We don't see it very well because a lot of what I'm talking about doesn't happen in the modern world in actual collaboration with others. It's cultural norms and conventions which structure everything we do. And we have a kind of a commitment to them. As a member of the culture, we have a kind of a commitment to the cultural collective. And therefore, we are interdependent with others in our cultural group. And therefore, we owe them things and they owe us things. I'm using the Scanlon language of owing as basic here. And Scanlon says that normativity is about reasons. Well, justifying or providing reasons for one's thoughts and actions represent a special instance of such coordination and negotiation. And I should say that Bob Brandom was generous enough when I was visiting you all to put me in the office of the what I forgot what he's called, the sage of Pittsburgh. So I know that reasons and the space of reasons is
Sellars,
sorry?
Sellars, you mean, right?
Yes, Wilfred Sellars. Sorry, I'm having a senior moment, and blocking on the name. Name finding goes with age, in case any of you aren't old enough to know that. And so justifying or providing reasons for one's thoughts or actions. Why do you do that? Why do you justify or provide reasons? Because you have someone who's in it with you, who has some interest in or commitment with you in some act, even if it's just in a general cultural way and not in a collaborative way. So I'm going to show you a couple of little studies here with kids. So here, these two children have made a joint commitment, a la Margaret Gilbert, and we have kind of orchestrated it. We've said, you guys want to play this game together? And they say, yes, yes. Okay, you guys want to play it together, yeah? And we actually have them do a high five. Okay, we're going to play the game together. But unbeknownst to them, the child on the right, we taught her something different. And so the one on the left thinks they're going to play the game a certain way, but then the one on the right is not doing her role in the right way. And you'll see what she says. At first, she's just telling her what to do. One has to do it like this. Man muss in German. Man muss. And that's, let me let her finish because she'll keep going. Man muss ein Seil ziehen. Wieso? Like this. Okay, this is normative talk. This is 3-year-olds. This is completely normative talk, which is, notice that the child is not saying, she did at first, she said, do this, do that. So she just gave an imperative at the beginning, but she doesn't say, I don't like it when you do the wrong thing. She says, you shouldn't. Now, why is the shouldn't? Why man muss? Why one must? Because we made a joint commitment and you're not holding up your end of the bargain. Right? And so importantly, we have another condition where they don't make a joint commitment. They just play the game. They just come in and each of them has learned it separately. They start just playing around with it. And now the other one doesn't play the role right. The other one makes no normative language, right? she might say, do this, do that, but she doesn't say you ought to. Why not ought to? Because the joint commitment is what we are both committing to play our role the right way. And so now you owe it to me to play your role the way we agreed you would. Now, I understand this normative language is not easy to reduce to other things, but this is what happens at 3 years old. It's an empirical fact that it's not till 3 years old that children talk like this. And they only talk like this when they're in a joint commitment with somebody else, or they're in, here's another situation, or they're in a cultural game that clearly is cultural. We name this as a certain kind of game. I'm not going to, you don't need to know the details. It's okay. But now we're going to have a puppet play the game wrong. So the child is not collaborating. It's not ruining it for the child, but the puppet is playing the game not the way the child has understood it to be playing.
Oh, die Rose. Die Rose ist richtig. Nicht der Schuh. Falsch.
So this is the language of right and wrong.
Don't. Malachsel.
You're not doing it?
Oh, der Schuh. Der geschummelt.
Okay, so sorry. So the language of right and wrong and cheating is, of course, normative language, and this is not a collaboration. But what you can show is that they don't do this when there is a collective commitment to cultural norms. They don't do it if the child doesn't even know how to play the game. If the person comes in and says, "Oh, what's this? I'll do this," but the puppet is acting like he knows how to. What do children do when they want to break a joint commitment? They give a reason, make an excuse, give a justification, give a reason. So here's a child, just look at the bottom two frames here. This is a child in the condition where she has made a joint commitment with the adult. The adult says, let's play this stamping game, okay? And the child says, okay. So she agrees with the adult to do it as a joint commitment. And now you're going to see that's in the left-hand bottom panel. And then you're going to see somebody come in the right-hand panel on the bottom and tempt her to break her joint commitment. Okay, well, we're not studying politeness. Okay, so maybe she wasn't exactly fully polite there, but what we found was that if there's no joint commitment, the child doesn't make excuse. The child doesn't notify the adult they're leaving. So if they don't make a joint commitment, sorry, I can't get that little no joint commitment to come up without the thing running. If there's no joint commitment, then so the child is playing with that game and the adult just comes in and joins in and there's no joint commitment. And then the child leaves, they don't ever make an excuse or give a justification or give a reason. So the reason or justification is that I'm breaking the shared agency. We're doing this together. We have a shared agency. We made a joint commitment. We have a joint agency, make a joint commitment, and I have to break it. So I have to notify you. We all do this all day, every day. We're talking to somebody in the hall, and that's all fine, everything. We don't ever just walk away. We say, oh, okay, I got to prepare for class. See you later. So you take leave. You break the joint commitment of we're having a conversation together. And of course, you don't make an explicit joint conversation. Let's have a conversation. Okay. In adult life, they're implicit, but when you walk up and start a conversation, it's an implicit joint commitment to stick with it until there's a reason not to.
Okay.
So what I've called the shared intentionality schema, this is the key, is that it's dual level. We have a joint goal or a collective goal. We have joint attention or collective. You have your role. I have my role. You have your perspective. I have my perspective. And so it's this tension between my individual goal and our shared goal to which we are committed that causes this kind of norm that was the immediate basis of normative thinking, attitudes, and language is the claim. Now, cognitively, which I haven't really talked about here, and I'm going to just do very quickly, we have claimed that without joint attention, you don't have the notion of perspective. Now, we talk about perspective all the time in very loose ways, but I'm gonna propose that the more fine-tuned distinction, definition of perspective is when if you look out one window of the building and see one thing, and I look out one building of another window in the building and see another thing, we just see different things. Now, if you want to say you have one perspective on the world and I have another perspective on the world, then you have a common substrate for us to have different perspectives on. So I want to claim that the whole notion of perspective in that more narrow sense depends on shared intentionality, depends on shared attention, that we have different perspectives on the same thing. And that gets you to epistemic normativity of understanding false beliefs, where I believe it's here, that's my perspective. You believe it's there, that's your perspective. And then there is where it is objectively. We could both be wrong. We have a recent study showing that children know they could be wrong. Okay, I saw it go in that box, but maybe there's a false hole in the bottom. Maybe the adult's tricking me. To fully understand false beliefs, you have to understand that I could be wrong also. So there is where I believe it is, where you believe it is, and where it really is objectively, which is, you know, is a construction to solve these differences of perspective. So I've said that it's a metacognitive revolution of a universalizing inference that objective perspective independent of particular perspectives. So it's parasitic on the notion of a belief which could be wrong, of a perspective that they're different perspectives and they can't. There's some situations where they can't both be right. There's some situations where both perspectives are okay, but there's some where they can't both be right. And to resolve those, we have ended up with thinking about an objective perspective. So the transition to socio-moral normative thinking and attitudes, and again, I'm influenced by all my discussions with Bob as well as others, but that the transition from factual language to normative language, there's this sort of unbridgeable gap. Yes, I realize that, but that I think some of the vocabulary from shared intentionality is can kind of put in some transitions. So the transition to socio-moral normative thinking attitudes is the notion of roles, because when we're collaborating, each of us has individual goal within the shared agency, and though in our roles. So in the role, so we're going to do this thing together. I have my role, that's my individual goal. You have your role, that's your individual goal. But now they have socially shared and understood standards and regulation. So the reason that child protests is because she knows, we both know you know how to do this. We know together in common ground that you know how to do this and you're not doing it. And that's why I say you should do what we both know you should do. So a role is in the direction of normativity because it has socially shared common ground standards and regulation. I protest when I think you're not living up to them. And deviations are justified to partners with reasons. I'm not playing my role correctly because I'm sick or because I broke my hand or whatever. All right? I give reasons for why I'm not playing my role as a way of justifying and maintaining my kind of cooperative identity. The transition to epistemic, I'm sorry, that should be epistemic normative thinking, is perspectives, because they are individual attention as coordinated with socially shared common ground, joint attention to a referent. And again, deviations are justified to partners with reasons that I believe that this is the right way to look at it, whereas you believe this is the other way to look at it. And so I have to give you reasons for why my way is better than your way. And so a prerequisite to sort of epistemic normativity is the notion of perspective, I would claim. So this is the best we can do at a transitional vocabulary. And the major claim is that all of this is only possible in the dual level structure, that is individual and shared, of shared agency and intentionality. So it's this tension between my individual goals and perspectives and the group or the shared goals and perspective of my collaborative partner or the group. It's that tension that is the breeding ground of normative thinking and attitudes, is the claim. I think I will skip this. This is in the book. I try to give a summary of human experience. Sorry, that's a little ambitious, but I did have a sort of endogenous. We have our valued situations of instantiating goals, actual situations that we perceive, possible situations that we imagine when we make decisions. So these kind of different modes of experience of the external world are part of agentive decision-making. Endogenous executive experience, conscious attention to our own agency leads to these logical inferences and causality ultimately, and understanding others as agents and so forth. And intersubjective, shared intentions, mental coordination with others has all the stuff I was talking about there, the coordination of perspectives and recursive inference to objective situations, cooperative regulation of roles, conventions, norms, reasons, normative necessities, and so forth. I did draw this up before I realized that it does correspond to Davidson's in some way. And it's not the same, but he has the three modes of experience, the objective, subjective, and intersubjective. And it actually kind of reproduces those, even though it's intended differently. But that's what I want to characterize human experience in these three modes, and give an evolutionary experience, an evolutionary explanation in terms of agency for how these modes of experience work, came into being. And I will just say as a final thing that I've been influenced very much in all of my thinking philosophically. I'm not a philosopher, as you, I'm sure, have seen by some of the gaffes I've probably committed in talking about some of this stuff. But I've always been attracted to the pragmatists. Sandy and I had a talk about pragmatism at a conference we were both at recently. And so I just have a couple of quotes here of the kinds of things that I think show that the pragmatists had some of these same intuitions, but they didn't have the psychology. They didn't know anything about non-human psychology, and so any details. So this is Peirce saying that natural selection is a theory of how forms come to be adaptive, that is to be governed by a kind of quasi-purpose. It suggests a machinery of efficiency to bring about this end. The machinery of efficiency is agentive organization. That's how it gets done. Individual organisms make decisions, and that's how the species ends up in a good place. William James is quite explicit about the pursuance of future ends and choices of means for their attainment are the mark and criterion of the presence of mentality. You could also say agency in phenomena. And the opening sentence of Legge and Hookaway's article on pragmatism in the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy is, pragmatism is a philosophical tradition that understands knowing the world as inseparable from agency within it. And so my claim here is that how humans know the world, what I call the human experiential niche, is structured and organized by its evolved agentive architecture, including that from ancestral species before human existed, and including shared agency as a uniquely human phenomenon. So the organism as agent model gives a fuller evolutionary account of the diversity of natural psychologies in the natural world than does the mind as computer model. And it also explains why human psychology and experience are the way they are. Not a rational justification that some of the classic Enlightenment philosophers were looking for, but an evolutionary explanation, which again, I would say from a naturalistic perspective, which I know is not the only perspective, but from a naturalistic perspective is the only game in town. Central to the model is the organizing role of agentive decision-making and action, including shared agency, decision-making, and action in human experience. That's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mike, for this great talk. So let me remind the audience about how we're going to be proceeding. Please go to the bottom of your screen, and there's a button called Q&A. Click on it, write your name, and I will promote you to panelists so that you can ask your question directly to Mike, rather than me having to do translation. And we'll start right now. And Matt Brown, I will promote you to panelists right now. Just accept the invitation. Matt, good to see you. Floor is yours.
Okay.
It works.
All right. Thanks, Michael, for a very interesting talk. I'm Matt Brown. I'm at the Center for John Dewey Studies at Southern Illinois University. And I'm really interested about the connections with pragmatism that you mentioned so briefly at the end. And I saw a lot of overlap between what you were talking about and ideas in John Dewey's work. They're particularly
Nature and experience, in particular,
Yeah.
yes.
Yeah. The focus on situations, his account of causality, the evolutionary account of the emergence of human thinking and language in relation to one another. So I just thought I'd invite you to sort of expand in more detail on that bit.
Sorry, on which bit? The connection to pragmatism or the
influence of pragmatism on your thinking here, yeah.
I have to say that I always get more out of Peirce and Mead, a little bit less out of James and Dewey. So I don't know why that is, but Dewey is so abstract for my naturalistic tastes, but absolutely in tune with that. And I would say my two main themes in this work are evolution and agency, and I would say that they are what define the pragmatist approach. Is they're all with the exception of Peirce, they're all natural scientists. They either psychologists or sociologists, whatever you want to call it. And Peirce, of course, was a scientist in the sense that he did a lot of those measurements in the Geological Survey and all of that. So they're all steeped in natural science. They're steeped in evolution, and they've got their Kantian background and their continental philosophy background and all of that. But they're steeped in evolution and action. I just think they didn't have the tools of psychology, of, I think, control systems. I'm very much influenced by the logic. They were, I think Mead called himself a social behaviorist. Dewey has the word behavior in some of these cases. Behaviorism is a linear stimulus response. Control systems and agency is an active organism who's going out to make things happen, to promote their own ends. So to me, that's really the main connection. Is this? When I see their arguments about truth and the pragmatic definition of truth, my mind goes blank. I mean, they're just in a set of questions and in a milieu that's not conducive to our current questions. I think I'm inspired by their general approach, and if they had a lot of the psychological understanding of how much other species actually are like us and so forth, they would have ended up somewhere close to where I am. I don't see any of them talking about other animal species anywhere. I mean, Hume did, but I don't see any of the pragmatists talking about other animal species, hardly at all. James might have said a little bit, but not much. So anyway, that's the best I can do for you, Matt. That I'm not a philosopher. I don't know the history that well, but that's clearly the tradition that fits most and best with what I'm doing.
Thanks, Matt, for joining us. Margaret, floor is yours.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you so much. First of all, this is really, really interesting. You mentioned other accounts for origins of the psychology of causal reasoning, inference, or logic and argumentation. And you said that there were a few that you had in mind already, and I imagine this is one of them. And if so, I'm really curious what you think of it, of Hugo Mercier and Dan Sperber's account about giving reasons and convincing others to think the way that you do, being the origins of reasoning. It seems like there are some things in common here, but some other things that would be pretty distinct.
Well, I'll say first that they don't really talk much about like the sort of, systematic, syllogistic kind of thing so much, but I've argued with them a lot where I'm basically in agreement. And in fact, I took a lot of inspiration from my notion of reasons, but I think they're a little bit too much about it's for winning an argument. And I think that it comes from making a joint decision where you and I we're going to pursue something together. And in that situation where we're dependent on one another for pursuing something together, I don't want to win the argument. I want to get it right. And if you give me a good reason for why your way of doing it is better than mine, I say, oh, okay, good idea. Let's do that. So I think if you talk about people being reasonable and following reason and employing reason, I think you've got to start with cooperative situations where it's in both of our benefits to get it right. rather than just winning the argument. And the sort of winning the argument, I call that the car salesman view. The car salesman view is to convince the other one not to get it right. And of course that comes, but that's parasitic on the cooperative decision making as initial. I've talked again with Dan Sperber about his about some of his communication stuff as well. You can't start with lying. You have to start with cooperation. And when everybody's gullible and believing everything everybody says, then lying can get a foothold. But if nobody believes anything anybody's saying, lying can't ever get off the ground. So cooperation is the first step to these uniquely human things. And for him, the sort of convincing others that you're right is clearly important, but I don't think it's the first step. The first step is us getting it right together.
Thank you.
Thanks, Margaret. Virginia, floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for the talk. I had a few clarificatory questions because I'm not familiar with your work. And so I was particularly interested in the part with animals and how you categorize both the differences and convergences between us and animals. And so you said, if I got this right, that we both share agency, but we don't share normativity, and that you also disagreed with the fact that with the expression a theory of mind for animals when they externalize perception and behavior. And I was wondering, so if in your if you have like these classes like that, so non-human animals would be agent, but not rational or normative. And then would you call their agency something like intelligent as opposed to normative? And if yes, what would you make? I mean, how would you describe the difference between an intelligent agency as opposed to a normative agency? I don't know if that's...
Well, you're getting to a whole vocabulary issue and whatever. The way I would say it, I'm addressing your question, but I may change the vocabulary slightly. That many animals are agents. I don't think amoeba are agents, but I think all organisms that are certainly all vertebrates are agents. And what humans have that's different is shared agency, and shared agency is what generates normativity. That was my argument at the end. And so, yes, only humans are normative creatures. I would say that animals have, and I don't know if this is an overuse of the term, but some people talk about instrumental normativity. So having a goal, there is a right and a wrong. There's a, I ought to do this if I want to get it right. So that's not human normativity. No, that's not human normativity, but that is something like instrumental goal-based normativity or something like that. The correct and incorrect action given that I want a goal. Yeah, so that's the way I would characterize that.
Okay, thank you.
All right, thank you, Virginia, for joining us. Sandy, you're next.
Hi, Mike. I love the talk, as you won't be surprised to hear. I had a little a specific question, which was, I really appreciate the structure in that it really requires kind of shared goal in order to get off the ground, or even having a goal in order to make to give an agentive account. So I'm curious about when there's goal uncertainty. So in non-normative, or maybe even some normative agents, that the goals are kind of specified by the environment and the demands upon the evolutionary properties that get you, to do the actions in your repertoire, right? So I can see where the goals may be kind of externally specified, but when you get to collective human action, I'm curious about if the responses to goal uncertainty would be supporting your view, namely that if you're in a shared cooperative situation and there's goal misalignment, then that has to happen before the rest of the shared agent activities get off the ground. So I'm wondering if you thought about those kinds of situations.
I would say that in a lot of cases, that's exactly where I'm saying the normative way of thinking comes about when there's a goal misalignment. We think we're doing something together, but you want to do it this way and I want to do it that way. And then we have to say, well, no, we agreed to do this, and then we argue. So I think belief misalignment is the one we think about more. We sort of have the same goal, but you think we should do it this way or that way, or you think it's based on this fact or that fact. So yeah, that's exactly what I would say. You need you have, when I was saying that all this is generated by the tension between the shared and the individual, that's sort of what I was trying to get. You have the shared that we both sort of agreed to or committed to, and then we have the individual, which is discrepant with that, and that for both goals and beliefs. And that's what generates the friction that says, wait a minute, okay? Yeah, and these notions of, I depend on you. You could maybe give a causal account of me depending on you, that we won't, our actions won't cause the result unless you perform your role and I perform my role. And so this dependency and interdependence, and not only that, but you depend on me and I depend on you. Again, I'm influenced by Bob having these, two different realms, never the twain shall meet. And I'm trying to get them to meet by, at least in the naturalistic world, them to meet by having these kind of transitional situations and concepts that to resolve the tension between individual and collective.
Great, thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Wen, floor is yours.
Hi, Mike. Thank you so much for this and for engaging with the philosophy so generously. So this is a little bit about the joint goal and joint attention. And I wonder if maybe this is part of what you have in mind in joint attention. But it seems also that there's a way in which the person that you're engaging with is kind of an object of attention as well, but in a very distinctive way. So like in the case where you had the other person playing with the balls, right? So the girl who's playing with one adult can sort of notice the other adult, but they are different objects, so to speak, right? So the adult that she's playing with, by agreement, stands out in a certain way that the other doesn't. And so there's a kind of, I guess I would have thought, a kind of maybe individual agency, but within the context of this joint goal, where the other person that I'm working with has a kind of normative status. And so is that baked into your idea of joint attention, or would you want another kind of widget in that, a distinctive kind of normative attention where I see you as a partner and have obligations to you?
Yeah, I think that comes from the joint commitment, and the joint commitment is just the very everyday thing of, hey, let's go get a cup of coffee. Okay. And Margaret Gilbert has her famous paper on taking a walk together. Let's take a walk together. Okay. You can't just turn around and walk another way. And so without making an excuse or giving a justification or a reason. So you're asking about joint attention in particular. I think that the joint commitment structures your attention, and you see the other person with whom you've made a joint commitment as in a different way. You see them as a normative agent, if you want to say that, that's responsible for their actions, is responsible to me to play their role and all of that. And so the joint attention is part of our working together toward a joint goal. And if everything goes smoothly, we have a joint goal, we jointly attend to things relevant to that joint goal, and we just do it. But when there's a bump in the road, then we have to do something else to work it out. So I think it's not the joint attention that generates it, it's the joint commitment that generates it, and the joint attention is part of that package.
Thank you.
Thanks, Wen. True, floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for the talk. I had a rather particular question as well, that I think this is about a pretty small point in your overall argument, but I wanted to get your thoughts on it. This was back when you were talking about the emergence of causal reasoning, and the earliest form of that being a sort of agentive causation, as opposed to external causation. And you mentioned that a lot of the classic Michaud experiments, the launching type experiments, are sort of mirrored in the development of especially young infants, emerging concept of causation being about, contact events, physical events. And I was just thinking, it seems like one might say that sort of the first actions that an infant does, the first sort of ways that they manipulate their environments are not really physical manipulations, but are social interactions with their parents and with, well, caretakers. And I'm wondering if there's anything interesting, any interesting observation that results from that, because you would think then that, I guess I'm wondering if perhaps the sort of primacy of physical causation and agentive physical causation, you might think, comes from a sort of shared ancestry with other great apes, where social interactions were not sort of the first kinds of agential behaviors that a young ape was making in their environment. But anyway, I just wanted to throw that out there and see what you thought.
No, that's really interesting. I don't know exactly what age I would put on it, but infants, and some of it is like when they cry, initially it's kind of reflexive and it only becomes voluntary a little bit later. But they know that they're, let's call it whining as a kind of a ritualized crying. When they're whining, they know that that's going to spur the adult into action. And I guess I think that causality and intentionality are kind of like on parallel planes. Understanding the physical world and this physical causality and the linear causality is one thing, and understanding agents is another. So at some point, the child is understanding that mom has to hear my whining and that she has to want to help me. So the causality involved is different than I hit something and knock it over. So you're kind of saying, maybe they understand the sort of social causality first. I'm not sure. They certainly understand contingency, the social contingency, that when I whine, mom comes and helps me or whatever. I don't know how much they understand the actual agent of causality, the way that we would think about it based on beliefs and desires, if you want to put it that way. So it's a very interesting question. And I guess I was just focused on the causality analysis on the physical world, and that the first notions of physical causality is me banging on things and grabbing things and knocking them over.
Yeah, thank you. Interesting. Yeah.
Thanks, True, for coming. Sebastian, floor is yours.
Hi, I found this very interesting, and I'm like Wayne Wu. I'm working in the philosophy of attention, and I've been very interested in the role that norms for attention, so what we should and should not pay attention to, play in our sort of social lives. And I'm kind of very interested in what your latest thoughts are on the changes to our attentional system played in that transition to our human social capacities. And when you talked, I was struck by the fact that you placed attention kind of at the core of our agency, referring to Wayne's work. But then when it came to like the role of attention in our shared agency, it wasn't really the meshing of attention that was in the driving seat. It was the commitments. And I wondered a little bit about that, what your thoughts are on this sort of transition in our ways of both attending ourselves and shaping each other's attention toward humans. What your latest thoughts are on this?
I will say that the first paper I ever published in 1981 was about joint attention. So I started with the social version, and I only went back to the individual version in recent years. So I guess what I would say is that this analysis in terms of agency always puts the action in the driver's seat. That's the key. And that I think organisms that are not agents, I mean, just take an amoeba to be as uncontroversial as possible, I don't think they have attention. I actually wrote a little short commentary on a recent PBS paper on attention, where I tried to say it comes with goals, because goals give me relevance. And so I attend to things that are relevant to my actions. And bottom-up attention, I think nature has built in to be relevant to things. So a loud noise is relevant because it might be a predator, and the smell of delicious food is relevant because it's going to help. So we do have these bottom-up things that grab our attention, but things that would grab the attention of a snake don't grab my attention. And so the attention is relative to the action possibilities. And that's why what I was taking mainly out of Wayne's thing was the Wayne kind of has action in the driver's seat also. I don't know if maybe it's in the logical driver's seat, but it's that attention is to things that are related to action. And that's how you get relevance. And so anyway, so then I would say in the joint attention and the social version of it, I think all the same things happen, but I was just focused on the notion of perspective, that I'm attending to this and you're attending, we're both looking at the same thing, but I'm attending to this aspect or looking at it from this side and you're doing it from that side. So I do think the joint commitment is the driver, and the joint goal, let's just say joint goal more generally, is the kind of driver of what's jointly relevant. Let's say we're doing something together, right? And let's say we're chasing a prey. And there are two situations. One is I'm chasing the prey with you, and we're very knowledgeable because we've done it a lot together. And we see that there's a river over there, and we know that the prey is blocked. And not only do I know the prey is blocked, I know that you know it, and I know that you know I know it. It's in our common ground. So we look, I point to the river, okay, to make sure you see it. And that's a joint attentional invitation to joint attention. See the river, and we know what that's going to mean because of our common knowledge. But if I'm doing that with a naive individual, say a child, I can't point to the river and say attend to the river and expect them to make the inferences I want them to, because they don't know that the river blocks the escape of the prey. So that's why I'm saying that attention is in the service of action for individuals, but I think joint attention is also in the service of our joint actions and determining what's relevant for our joint actions. And a lot of communication in collaborative situations is about me pointing out things to you that will help you play your role better and therefore help us succeed as a group better.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us. Rotem, floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I found it interesting that you assume that we have this kind of natural primary first order subjective mentalizing kind of, because many times in the literature I found that the scientists and the philosophers attribute mentalizing to a kind of inference, even if it's on our own mental states. So I would like to know what do you think about it? I guess it might contrast your view, maybe.
So, you know, classically it's been the theory theorists versus the simulation theorists, right? And I actually think you need both of them. And I'm assimilating what you said to a kind of a theory of making inferences about what others know and whatnot. But I think you have to, if a Martian came down and landed here and said, I'm, to use a random term, I'm grooning the tree over there, where he means some kind of perceptual experience of which I have no experience. So it's some kind of infrared vibrations or something. How am I supposed to understand what that is? I can't, right? But if the Martian comes down and he has things that look like eyes and says, I'm seeing the tree, then I know what seeing is, all right? I see things all the time. And all right, now I don't know, he may be seeing something different from me. So then I need a theory about why does he see something different? Well, his view of part of the tree is blocked, right? So I need a theory to make inferences about precisely what he sees. But the concept of seeing, in my opinion, my humble opinion, can only come from my own experience of seeing. And I do think that in a lot of these cases where we're talking about externalizing things, you have to have either an executive or a metacognitive level of operating where you kind of observe yourself attending to things. You observe yourself pursuing goals. And I think a lot of our learning is dependent exactly on that. We watch ourselves doing things and see what results. Some of the most basic learning literature in animals way back when posed the problem of if we do something and it's unsuccessful, how do we know whether we did the right thing and the environment was not as we thought it was versus I made a mistake and I slipped? It's because I'm executively examining my decision making and so forth. So anyway, long-winded answer to your question is the way I understood it is that I do believe we need our own experience of our own mental states And that's not sufficient, but that's a necessary condition for mentalizing about others. And then I use theory about why they experience the world in the precise way they do in this immediate situation. But the concepts I use to form that hypothesis about what they're experiencing are coming from my own experience. That's the way I would view it.
All right, thank you very much for joining us. It's already 1:30, so it's time to stop our meeting today. Apologies for those who are still on the queue. So some days are like that where we have a lot of question. Mike, thank you very much for this amazing lecture. Thanks to the audience. It's been really a pleasure to have you back online. Hopefully one day we'll bring you back in person to the center.
Yes, that'd be great.
Duke isn't very far, so that should actually be doable. So to all of you, see you either in person at the center in Pittsburgh or online for our next Featured Former Fellows meeting. Thanks, Mike.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.